Hello and welcome to this section. Today we want to talk about S3 bucket permissions. So let's go to the S3 inside the AWS Management Console. And if you remember, we were working on a bucket called ITrepo-test. I'm going to click on this one. There are a bunch of tabs here. We talk about the properties. And today I want to talk a little bit about permissions. Click on permissions and the first tab is public access settings. I just want to show you something as a reminder that we actually saw this menu before when we were creating the bucket, but we may forgot it. So let's create a new bucket from the scratch to see what kind of options did we have through the creation of the bucket. I'm going back to the S3, click on create bucket and give it a new name, ITrepo-test. And we know that we cannot choose this name anymore because we've already chosen this one, and I put just one at the end, so ITrepo-test in the same region. And now if I open this dropdown, because we have other buckets, we can basically copy the settings from other buckets and use it for this bucket, which I'm not going to do it right now, but last time it was empty. Hitting next. When we are creating the bucket, we can enable versioning and we can enable server logging. We've already created these ones. And server logging, basically we need to specify a bucket for keeping our buckets, and if we like, we can add a prefix for it. And we talk about tags, and we also talk a little bit about the object level logging. Encryption was also another thing that we talk about it, and that we can use the S3 encryption key or the KMS. And there are a bunch of other advanced settings that we can talk about them later. And about the CloudWatch for monitoring or requests to the bucket, we can use it, but we'll talk about this one later. So basically a bunch of them we already know about them. I'm going to hit next, and in the permission step 3, we have something called public access setting for this bucket. By default, we are blocking new public ACLs and uploading public objects. We are removing public access granted through the ACLs, and also somehow we are doing the same thing for the policies. So we have two main settings. One of them is related to the ACL and one of them is related to the policies. And basically we are blocking or removing any public access through our S3 buckets. Another option that we have here is related to the log delivery group, which, if you remember, when we are enabling the logging on our bucket from the graphical user interface or from the website, is going to grant the access for a bucket to be able to be written by the log delivery group. So we went through these settings before, and here as a note, we can change them later. I'm going to cancel this and go back to my ITrepo-test, and there's a permissions tab, and this is the location actually that we can change our public access settings. So by default, if I hit edit, you can see that there are all check marks here, and basically we are blocking or removing any public access. So how we can test this? It's really actually easy for testing. Let's add a new file to our bucket with the public access, and we'll see what will happen. So go back to the overview. I'm going to create a new folder called public for testing purposes. No encryption. Go inside the public and hit upload, and I'm trying to upload file1.txt. I'm hitting next. Here in the permission tab, so we can add other accounts for accessing to this file, or we can manage public permissions. By default says do not grant public read access to this object. I can change this one and I can say grant public read access to this object. Basically I'm telling S3 that I want to upload this text file and I want to have public access to this file. Everyone should be able to see this file, and it's giving me a warning here, which is we are aware of this one. I'm hitting next and I'm going to upload this file. But look at here. Well, it seems that I uploaded the file, but nothing happened. If I hit refresh, I'm not seeing the file here. And look at down here, there isn't one error here. If I click on the error, it says 100% failed for the upload. If I click here, it says forbidden. And basically, we are forbidden to upload a file with a public access to this bucket. Why? The reason is obvious. If I go back to the bucket permissions, in the public access settings, we are blocking new public ACLs and uploading public objects. That's why we cannot do it. So as I said before, AWS is so good related to the security and is going to lock down our bucket by default. It doesn't let us upload any object that is publicly accessible. This is for security reason, because there were so many incidents before. Actually, this public access setting, it wasn't in S3 before. After a while, AWS added this one to their features, and because there were some incidents before that employees or people from different companies put some stuff on the S3 bucket which they were publicly accessible, and they forgot to put proper permission on them or lock them down, and then there were security breaches and some people access those buckets and start using them. Don't forget that there is an address for your bucket on the internet. If I go to one of our files, for example, as a test, you can see that this is our address, right? S3-US-West2, this is my region, and .amazonaws.com and my bucket name. If someone tried this URL with bunch of different random bucket names, they probably can find out some of the names. And when I'm saying someone, there is an application out there which is scanning all of the buckets in different regions, and they try to extract all the information if they're publicly accessible. So this is going to be a security problem. Going back to our test, how I can change this one, and I want to basically upload something that it has publicly accessible to the end user. Well, we need to change the permission. It's like 2 steps. If you want to make something publicly accessible, first we need to change the public access settings on the bucket. It's like a safety button or safety check before making an object publicly accessible. We have 2 steps to do this. So I'm going to edit this one and remove the first check mark here, which is blocking the new public ACLs. This one is related to the current objects, but I'm just looking at the new one for now. I'm hitting save, and even it is asking for confirmation. There are a lot of security concerns here. I'm confirming this one, and it says public access settings updated successfully. Now I go back to my folder and I try to upload the file again with the same permission, and I want to make this one publicly accessible. Hit next. And now I can see the file here. Basically, it is success. I changed the permissions of the bucket to let us upload files that they are publicly accessible. Well, it's good. We could be able to upload the file, but let's see if we can see the file. Let's go to the file and try this URL. If I try to open this file from this URL without any authentication, we get the access denied again. And the reason is that we actually open the bucket to be able to upload objects with the publicly accessible ACLs, but we are not allowing our bucket to show us anything with the publicly accessible permissions. So if I go to the permissions tab on the file, you will see that every one permission for the public access doesn't have anything in front of it. And the reason is that, again, it's the public permission on the bucket. If I go back to the bucket, to the permissions, in the public access settings, if I hit edit, so basically with removing this check mark, we allow our bucket to accept objects that we want them to be publicly accessible. It's fine. But the second one is actually removing anything with the public access from our bucket. Well, I mean removing ACLs from the publicly accessible objects. Technically, there are 2 options here. That one of them is for new objects that we're uploading, and the second one is for any object inside our bucket. So in order to then let our object to be really publicly accessible, we have to remove the second one. I'm going to remove this one. Hit save. Again, it needs a confirmation. I'm going back to my file, public. If I click on my file and go to the permissions tab, you can see there is no permission still here because the second check mark from the permissions settings on the bucket actually removed the public access. So we have a bunch of options to do here. If I go to the file and click on this URL, now I can see the file, and it's going to add the permission for me. Now I can go back, check the permissions, and everyone has the access. Or we could be, and if we click on the make public, you can see that it's success, and you can see the objects without any authentication, which is open to the public, and this is not a good thing. Don't forget that everyone can scan your URL and try to access anything inside your buckets. If I go back to my bucket and any other files that I have in my bucket, let's say, I don't know, I have a bunch of log files now. This one, for example, if I check the permissions, none of them they are publicly accessible. So as you can see, AWS is trying to lock down everything, and then we can basically open whatever we like. And there are 2 security mechanisms. One is we have to go to the bucket level and the permissions, and we have to basically tell the bucket that, okay, we can upload objects for publicly accessible, and also our objects inside the bucket, we want them to be able to be publicly accessible. Even if I go back to the S3 homepage here, there is an access tab, and you can see this says objects can be public on the ITrepo-test. But the other ones, this says buckets and objects not public. So for the first one, it means that we change the permissions for public access on the bucket. So another thing that I want to show you right now, just let's quickly check what is the permission of our bucket right now. I'm going to click on my ITrepo-test bucket, go to the permissions. So hit edit here in the public access settings. So basically we can upload any files with the publicly accessible permissions, which is wide open from the access lists. And we cannot do anything from the policy side. Let's test this one. I'm going back to my bucket overview, go back to the public directory and try to upload the file. So I click add files. So let's upload this S3-content. And I am not actually grant any public access to this file here. And next, upload the file. So we can upload the file, but if I go here and click on the file, I get the access is denied because by default, when I was uploading it, I said I don't want to have public access. But here, if I go to the permissions, I have a bunch of options. I can go to the permissions and here I can hit everyone and I can give permission to the file. This is one way. Another way is I can go back to the overview tab, hit make public. And if I do this, it's exactly like going to the permissions and hit everyone here and give the read permission to it, which we can see it right now here. And now if I go back to the overview and I click on the file, I can see the content of the file. The reason that I can do this is because on the bucket, on the permission tabs, and for the public access settings, we remove the second check mark. That's the reason that we can do this. So for now, what I'm going to test is I'm going to put back all of these check marks here, and I want to double check the policy. We can do the same thing that we did right now with the policies. And actually policies are the AWS recommendation. AWS is not recommending to just mess around with the access lists and just go to the access list, which is this tab, access control list, and I start changing this tab. They are suggesting to work with the policies, with the bucket policies, and start configuring the bucket policy. I want to show you how we can do this quickly, but basically remember this in the public access settings right now. This is our setting, and I'm going to put it back to the normal, confirm it. This is the default settings, and we are not allowed to make anything publicly accessible, even upload it, doesn't matter through the ACL or doesn't matter through the policies. So for the policy settings, I am on the bucket. On the permissions tab, I go to the bucket policy, and here we can create a policy for give someone access to our bucket. It could be to a user, it could be to everyone. And for this testing purpose, I'm going to generate a policy to give everyone access to this bucket to see what will happen. So for doing this, there is a policy generator here. Go ahead and click on this one. In here in the drop down, I'm selecting S3 bucket policy. The effect is allow, and the principal is basically the user or the identity that want to have access, and put asterisks here. It means everyone for all Amazon services, for all actions. And here it needs the bucket name, ARN or Amazon resource name. The way that we can get this one, I can go back to my S3 management console on Amazon S3. I can click here on beside my bucket name and copy bucket ARN. Go back to the policy generator and paste it here. This is basically my bucket name, ARN, and then I can click on add statement and generate the policy. This is the policy for giving action to S3 for any user, and they are allowed to do everything on this bucket. It means this is going to be publicly accessible. So I'm going to copy this one. And I'm not going to close this because we need this one. I want to show you what will happen. I go back to S3 management console, going to my bucket, on the permission tabs. Well, basically, instead of going to the access control list and say, okay, we want to give everyone access to our objects inside the bucket, I'll go to the bucket policy, and here I'm pasting my policy here, and I'm saying, okay, let's give everyone public access to our bucket. And when I'm trying to do save here, I get an access is denied. And why is that? And I think now you can guess. It's because it's public access settings. If I go back to the public access settings, hit edit, by default it says block new public bucket policies. So we cannot create any public bucket policies by default. So let's remove this one. And I'm going to remove the second one for this testing purposes to check both of them, and hit save and confirm. And now I can go back to my bucket policy, paste it here, and hit save. And look at what is happening. It is working and is giving us right away warning that this bucket is publicly accessible, which is dangerous.